You wrote a moving memo to your team today about why commemorating Juneteenth is important, and you're asking employees to take some time to reflect and educate themselves about the long history of racism in this country. Given that you are one of the most senior Black executives in this country, from Uber to your time at Pepsi and the Department of Justice, how have you been experiencing these last few weeks and the latest momentum in the Black Lives Matter movement?
Well, I think I've been experiencing it like so many others, and that is both you've gone from the shock and the outrage at what we saw happen to George Floyd, but for many of us who are Black, it is a familiar outrage because we have seen this play out so many times before. You move from that to seeing the great activism and energy of people out in the streets. And a diverse crowd at that. I mean, you see a diversity in the throngs of peaceful protesters that you haven't seen, frankly, before in other protests around Black Lives Matter. And then what you see is incredible energy from all sectors, not just in the halls of policymaking, but also from business and from tech. Huge energy around how do we make sure we begin to finally grapple with issues of racial inequality, with racial promoting racial justice. And so for me, I think that this is a really important moment. It's a really important moment and opportunity for tech to lead. I think that it's important that we take the energy and the urgency and the dynamism of this moment and we channel it into long-term commitment that will result in long-term systemic change. That's the challenge that we have right now.
I'm so curious what your experience has been being the most senior Black executive in the room, often the only in the room, especially going from the Department of Justice, where your boss was literally Barack Obama, and coming to Silicon Valley, where we know there are so few Black executives, investors, and entrepreneurs.
Well, look, I think I have to say it is not a unique experience for me to often be the only Black person in the room or around a decision-making table. I will say my experience at the Department of Justice, working alongside Eric Holder, working for President Obama, that was actually an aberration in my professional life. Usually the room didn't look like that. And, my experience, again, is very typical of so many people of color, Black and brown people of color, of so many women who find themselves as the only one in the room. And for so many, they become sort of the exemplar. And you carry a lot of that with you. You carry a lot of that burden with you. You're very mindful that what you're saying and what you're doing and how you're acting can be used by people to, frankly, make judgments about others that they don't know. And so you carry all of that. You carry all of that with you. I think what's most important, though, is when individuals have the opportunity to be in positions where they can have an impact, where they can actually make a difference, that they take that opportunity and they exercise that agency to do just that. And so for me, for instance, it has been a very high priority to make sure that wherever I am, particularly if I'm in a position of leadership, to bring my values of diversifying the workplace to that position. It's something that I did at the Department of Justice. It's something I did at PepsiCo, and something I am doing at Uber in building a legal team,
Right.
a compliance and ethics team, a security team that reflects the great diversity of our country.
Now, it's no secret that this has been a tough time for Uber in the midst of a pandemic. You have had to lay off a significant number of people. How do you manage diversity issues in a time of crisis?
Well, they become even more important in the sense that you have to make sure that as you are restructuring, and if you are going to downsize, that you have to pay attention to diversity and inclusion, just as you pay attention to it as you are building up. But the other thing I'll say is this. diverse teams are stronger teams. We know this. The research is quite clear. They make better decisions. They bring perspectives into the room that are very important. They can lead to more financially successful firms and companies. We know all of that. Harvard Business School, others have done the studies, so the data is there. And what we also find is that they contribute to a stronger culture. So when companies go through difficult times like ours did, like so many other companies have gone through as a result of the COVID crisis, the strength of our culture really becomes incredibly important. And I believe the fact that we have had diverse voices around these tables and in this organization, that has made us stronger from a cultural standpoint and has helped us to withstand some of the difficulties that we are facing now. But as you go through a restructuring, as you downside, you have to pay attention to diversity and inclusion just as you do when you're growing.
Right. Now, so many of these issues with police seem to happen on the road, and given Uber's scale, Uber's interacting with the police a lot as well. Have any of the recent developments made you rethink or reassess Uber's relationship with the police, especially since, some protesters are calling for defunding the police?
Yeah, so, we do enjoy a very unique and special relationship with law enforcement where we have actually been able to help law enforcement resolve crimes like kidnappings, break up human trafficking or sex trafficking rings involving women and girls. And we want to continue to build on that kind of relationship. But we're very, very mindful about the fact that when we share data, we do so in an appropriate way under ways that go through legal process. And we are thinking and making sure that as we are sharing data, that we are doing so in a way that does not reinforce some of the institutional racism, systemic racism that has too often infected the culture of law enforcement. When people talk about defunding the police, what I have heard as the most common definition of that is looking at how we are making our community safer and making sure we are putting funds and resources into those things that actually make our community safer. I spent nearly half of my career in law enforcement as a prosecutor at the senior levels of the Department of Justice as well. And I have always believed that to make communities safer, you can't prosecute or arrest or incarcerate your way into a safer community. That takes a much more holistic investment in things that actually create strength in communities, things like economic security, things like educational security. And so, I believe it's an important conversation for us to be having about law enforcement, what our priorities are, and how do we make sure we get it right if we want to make sure our communities are safe and healthy.